Picture this. It's roughly 400,000 years ago. You are a human. Sort of. You've got the basic hardware, 2 legs, 2 arms, a brain that's doing its best, but you are not sitting at a dinner table with a fork in one hand and a phone in the other, scrolling while your food goes cold. You are squatting next to a carcass, tearing raw meat off a bone with your teeth. And this is going very well for you. Actually, this is a normal Tuesday. Nobody is complaining about the texture, nobody is sending it back. And then, at some point, everything changes. Someone we don't know who, we don't know if it was intentional, we genuinely don't know if they thought it was a good idea at the time, puts food near fire. And they eat it. And the entire trajectory of human civilization quietly, irreversibly tilts. That's what we're talking about today. Not just what cooking is, but why it happened, what it did to us, and why the answer is so much stranger and more consequential than anyone gives it credit for. Because here's the thing nobody tells you in school. Cooking didn't just change what we ate. Cooking changed what we are. Physically, neurologically, socially, cooking might be the single most important thing our species ever did. And we stumbled into it either by accident or by curiosity. Possibly both. Probably while something was on fire that wasn't supposed to be. Stick with me. Because this gets wild. Let's start with the problem that cooking solved, even before anyone knew it was a problem. Raw food is genuinely hard work for a body to process. Not impossible, other animals do it constantly, obviously. Gorillas eat raw food all day long. Chimps eat raw food. But if you actually watch a gorilla's daily schedule, here's what it looks like. Eat, 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 eat. Sleep, eat, eat, eat. A wild gorilla spends somewhere between 6 and 8 hours every single day just chewing. That's their life. Their entire existence is structured around the mechanical labor of breaking down raw vegetation with their teeth and jaw muscles and digestive systems. Humans can't do that. Not anymore. And here's where it gets interesting. Because the reason we can't is the same reason we can do everything else. Our digestive systems are, by primate standards, remarkably small. Our gut is about 60% smaller than you'd expect for an ape of our body size. Our teeth are smaller. Our jaw muscles are smaller, which is actually significant, because in most primates, large jaw muscles attach directly to the skull and physically constrain how big the brain case can grow. Ours don't. Our colons are shorter. Our stomachs are less acidic. Every single one of those things sounds like a disadvantage. And it would be if we were eating raw food. But we weren't. We were cooking. And cooking is, in the most literal biological sense, pre-digestion. When you apply heat to food, you are doing the work that your gut would otherwise have to do. You're breaking down the cellular walls. You're denaturing the proteins. You're making the energy inside the food dramatically more accessible. The Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham, and this is his argument, it's called the cooking hypothesis, and it is genuinely controversial in the academic world, but also genuinely compelling, argues that the physical changes we see in the human fossil record starting around 9 million years ago, the smaller guts, the smaller teeth, the bigger brains, the longer legs, all of it are consistent with a species that had started cooking. That cooking didn't just happen to us. Cooking made us. Let that land. The human brain is extraordinarily expensive. It runs on about 20% of your body's total energy budget, despite being only 2% of your body weight. To power a brain that big, you need caloric density that raw food, eaten in the quantities, and at the processing speed available to a hominid, simply cannot reliably provide. Cooking solved that equation. Heat the food. Get more energy per bite. Redirect that energy to the brain. Build a bigger brain. Use the bigger brain to get better at cooking. Repeat until you're making sourdough at 2 a.m. and calling it self-care. This is what's called a positive feedback loop, and it is one of the most elegant and disturbing ideas in all of evolutionary biology. We didn't evolve big brains and then figure out cooking. Cooking might have driven the evolution of the big brain. The chicken and egg problem here is genuinely dizzying, and scientists are still arguing about it, and that argument is one of the most interesting ongoing debates in paleoanthropology. But the evidence for the timeline is starting to look very compelling. Now here's where the conventional story falls apart. And once you see the crack, you cannot unsee it. The usual narrative goes, humans discovered fire, then learned to cook, then got smarter. Linear progression, clean story, everyone goes home happy. The problem is the archaeology doesn't cooperate. Controlled fire that humans were managing, maintaining, using, deliberately appears in the fossil record at various points, and the evidence is patchy and contested and maddeningly incomplete. The oldest compelling evidence for controlled fire use comes from a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating to around 1 million years ago. Burned bone fragments, burned plant ash, all in a context that suggests sustained, managed fire rather than a lightning strike that happened to torch some bones. But here's the thing that should make you pause. Homo erectus, the human ancestor that would have been using Wonderwork Cave, had already been around for about 800,000 years before that. 800,000 years of being Homo erectus before we find good evidence of controlled fire. And in that time, Homo erectus had already shrunk their gut and enlarged their brain relative to even earlier hominids, which raises an extremely uncomfortable question: what were they cooking with before fire? And the answer, which is genuinely strange, is possibly nothing. Or possibly solar heat. Or possibly fermentation, which is a kind of biological cooking that doesn't require fire at all. Or possibly they were exploiting naturally occurring fire events, wildfires, volcanic activity, and carrying embers rather than generating their own. We don't fully know. And the gap between the physical changes in the body and the earliest solid evidence of controlled fire is the biggest unresolved puzzle in the whole cooking origin story. That gap is not a minor detail. That gap is hundreds of thousands of years. Somebody needs to explain that gap, and nobody has yet. Not completely, and that is the kind of open scientific wound that drives researchers absolutely mad. What we do know, pretty confidently, is that by around 400,000 years ago, fire use was widespread enough to be showing up in the archaeological record across multiple sites in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Hearths burned bones with cut marks, which means cooked meat that was butchered intentionally. Evidence of food being processed near fire in ways that are hard to explain any other way. And by the time Homo sapiens shows up on the scene, that's us, appearing around 300,000 years ago, cooking is essentially just what you do. It's assumed. It's infrastructure. It's so baked into human existence, pun absolutely intended, that our bodies have literally reorganized themselves around it. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that, in my opinion, is criminally underrepresented in how people talk about the origin of cooking. Because cooking didn't just change individual bodies. Cooking changed how humans relate to each other. And that might be the bigger deal. Think about what a campfire does to a group of people. You have a heat source. You have light that extends the usable hours of the day beyond sunset, which is enormous. You have a central gathering point. You have food that takes time to prepare, which means you are sitting still together for an extended period. You have warmth in cold environments. You have protection from predators. Because most animals are deeply wary of fire. What you have, in other words, is the world's first living room. The hearth is not just a cooking device. The hearth is a social technology. And the things that happen around the hearth, the conversations, the storytelling, the social bonding, the division of labor between who gathers and who cooks, the negotiation of who gets which portion of the food, all of that is the foundation of human social structure as we know it. Wrangham actually makes the argument that cooking, specifically the cooking done primarily by females in early human groups based on patterns we see in modern hunter-gatherer societies, created a new kind of social dynamic. Food that has been cooked is worth stealing. Raw food, not so much. So cooking introduced a whole new social problem, protecting your cooked food from being taken, which in turn may have driven pair bonding, the formation of male-female partnerships where the male protects the female's food and fire, and the female shares cooked food with the male, which is a deeply romantic origin story for marriage, depending on how you look at it. I'm not saying this theory is settled. Wrangham's critics have real objections and the debate is very much alive. But the core insight that cooking restructured human social arrangements in ways that went far beyond nutrition is hard to dismiss. The hearth is not just where dinner happened. The hearth is where humanity happened. And then there's the time argument. Cooking takes time. Gathering fuel takes time. Tending fire takes time. But eating cooked food is dramatically faster than eating raw food. A cooked meal takes minutes to eat compared to hours for raw vegetation. So the net result is more free time. Time that doesn't have to be spent chewing. Time that can be spent on other things. What do you do with free time? If you're a hominid with an increasingly complex brain and a social group that's getting larger and more complicated, you talk. You plan. You remember. You imagine. You tell stories. You invent culture. The relationship between cooking and the development of language, storytelling, ritual, art, nobody can prove a direct causal line, and anyone who tells you they can is overselling. But the correlation in the timeline is the kind of thing that makes you sit with it for a while. Cooking frees up time and energy for the brain to do something other than keep the body alive. And the brain, being the brain, immediately gets to work on something more interesting. Here's something that tends to get quietly dropped from the cooking origin story, mostly because it doesn't fit neatly. Neanderthals cooked too. We know this. We've found burned bones at Neanderthal sites. We've found hearths. We've found evidence of starch granules from plant food, cooked plant food in the dental tartar of Neanderthal teeth, which is exactly as gross as it sounds, but also exactly as scientifically valuable. Neanderthals were not the raw food eating primitive brutes of the old stereotype. They were cooking. They were using fire deliberately and regularly. Their brains, for the record, were on average slightly larger than ours. Which raises again an unsettling question. If Neanderthals cooked, and Homo sapiens cooked, and possibly Homo erectus cooked or proto-cooked, then cooking is not a Homo sapiens innovation. Cooking is not our unique genius. Cooking is what happens when you are a large-brained, socially complex, bipedal primate living in a world with fire in it. Is cooking inevitable? Would any sufficiently intelligent species in our ecological position have arrived at the same solution? We have one data point, which is us and our relatives, and generalizing from one data point is a very human thing to do and also a very unreliable thing to do. But the convergence across multiple human species, arriving at cooking independently or inheriting it from a shared ancestor, is genuinely hard to dismiss. We nearly went extinct, by the way. Around 70,000 years ago, possibly triggered by the Toba supervolcanic eruption in what is now Indonesia, the human population may have crashed to somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 individuals. A genetic bottleneck so severe, it left a fingerprint in modern human DNA that we can still read today. We came astonishingly close to just not existing anymore. The whole project, billions of years of evolution, nearly finished at a volcanic event in Sumatra before we'd built a single city or written a single word. The groups that survived were the ones with the most sophisticated fire use, the most reliable cooking technology, the social structures built around the hearth. Cooking wasn't a luxury at that moment. Cooking was the margin between our existence and our extinction. Every human alive today is descended from someone who cooked. Let's take a step back, because there's something about cooking that is genuinely philosophically strange, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. Cooking is transformation. Every other thing animals do with food is essentially mechanical or chemical subtraction. You eat the food. Your body extracts what it needs. The food is diminished. But cooking takes raw ingredients and makes something that did not exist before. The wheat and the egg and the butter are not the croissant. The tomato and the basil and the salt are not the sauce. Cooking is, in the most literal sense, a creative act. It is making something new from the world's raw materials using knowledge, skill, time, and fire. No other animal does this. Not really. Some birds use tools to crack open food, some primates use rocks to smash things, but no other species on Earth systematically transforms raw materials into new things through controlled application of heat and chemistry. That is ours. Only ours. And we immediately and universally made it mean something. In every culture, across the entire archaeological and anthropological record, cooking is wrapped in ritual, in identity, in status, in love. Certain foods are sacred. Certain preparations are sacred. Who cooks for whom carries enormous social weight. A meal shared is not just calories transferred, it is trust established, relationship affirmed, community declared. The wedding cake is not just sugar. The funeral dish is not just carbohydrates. The meal your mother made when you were sick is not just nutrition. We use food and cooking as language. We use it to say, I care about you. You belong here. This is who we are. No other animal does this. This is completely ours. And it started, as best as we can tell, hundreds of thousands of years ago when some ancestor of ours sat near a fire, noticed that the thing that had fallen into the embers smelled better than it had before, picked it up, ate it, and felt something shift. So why did ancient humans start cooking food? Honestly, the answer is, for all the reasons, in overlapping waves, driven by accident and curiosity and survival and social complexity all at once. It probably started with opportunism naturally occurring fire. Food falling into it. Something smelling better. It became intentional because the results were undeniably good, and the body was rewarding the behavior with more energy than it had ever had before. It became essential because the body reorganized itself around the practice: smaller guts, bigger brains, a skull shape that could no longer efficiently process raw food. And it became culture, because humans cannot do anything without immediately making it mean something. You cooked something this week. Maybe you made something elaborate. Maybe you just boiled water. Maybe you reheated something in a microwave, which is technically applying energy to food to transform it, and I'm going to go ahead and count it because you deserve the historical continuity. When you did that, you were performing an act that your ancestors were performing 1,000,000 years ago. Not metaphorically. Not approximately. Literally the same act. The transformation of raw ingredients through heat into something more nourishing, more digestible, more human. The hearth became the kitchen. The kitchen became the restaurant. The restaurant became every meal you've ever had that mattered. At every table you've ever sat at with people you love. 1,000,000 years of fire. All of it leading to this. You should probably call your mom and eat dinner with her. That's it for today. If your brain just did the thing brains do when they connect something ancient to something immediately personal, drop it in the comments. I want to know what you're thinking. And I'll see you next time.